This looks serious. We're getting started. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for trekking out on a snowy Wednesday night where, let's be honest, we all just kind of wanted to stay at home. The wind said stay at home. So I'm glad you're here. For those of you watching online, thanks for joining us. Glad you're with us. Tonight we're going to do something that I have talked about doing over the last maybe 3 or 4 months, and we're going to tackle it tonight. It might be an abysmal failure. So I just want you to, I want to put that asterisk on it. Yeah, bring your expectations and take them real low, and then move them lower than that. So we're going to talk about the history of the River Church, so how we got to where we are now here in 2022. And so a few months ago, I did this for our staff. And so I sat down one day. So we have some archives in our file room at our Holly location there. So one of our staff, we started assembling all of these different things from all of the locations to just take care of them. So pictures and plaques and photo albums and newspaper clippings and all kinds of things from really 100 years. The scope of stuff is just unbelievable, as I'll show you in a little bit. So I sat down and I thought, okay, how am I going to do this? I knew I had to do it for the staff the following week. I was going to record it for the staff so that new staff could watch it and I didn't have to do it again. That was kind of my intentions of it. So I sat down and I started with a single sheet of just lined paper. And I thought, okay, I'll turn this sideways and I'll start kind of charting this out in timeline fashion. And then I was like, okay, I don't know where to start. So picking a starting point was crazy. And then I crumpled up that piece of paper about 6 times because I was using a Ghostbusters rule, don't let the streams cross. And so it was just really like trying to figure it out. So I just want you to see the madness of what it ended up like. So this is one single piece of paper that I ended up taping another piece of paper onto that didn't fit on there. So I taped a third piece of paper on there. And then I had to square it up for a 4th piece of paper. So I'm going to try my best to explain that to you. And so be merciful and be gracious to me on that. So if you have any questions about stuff, you can save those to the end. I'll try to do my best to do that. So let's pray together, and then we'll kind of walk through this story a little bit. Lord, thank you for tonight. Thank you for your love for us. Thank you for a new year. And Lord, we look to you with great hope and anticipation and excitement, God, of what you will do this year. Lord, as we look at the story of your church, of our part of the church, I pray, God, for just clarity and honesty, but also honor, Lord, to whom honor is due. And I just pray you'd just help us tonight in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so I'm gonna take this whiteboard and then I'm gonna extend past the whiteboard and just color on the walls. So that's what it's gonna take to do this effectively. So right now, the River Church is 8 locations across quite a span. So we have our Waterford location, we have our Lake Orion location. We have our Holly location, we have Grand Blanc, Flushing, Burton, Davison, and Goodrich. I think I named 8 there. I really hope I did. This is being recorded. No, don't take notes. Don't take notes. So this is being recorded. It's going to be on Facebook because I hope that people are watching tonight. We put it out on the Goodrich social media just as a thought, because people wonder sometimes, and for some of you this might bore you to tears. I might put you to sleep, and sorry about that. But so kind of where the story started. So we go all the way back to the 1800s, which is kind of weird to think about. And I'm going to try to timeline this as clearly as possible, so you have to hang with me. So all the way back in 1842. So 1842, a church started in Atlas, Michigan. So right down the road from here, about a mile from here. a church started. So it had a variety of different names. So it was Atlas Baptist Church. I think at some point it was First Baptist Church of Atlas. It had a variety of different names over the years. So that started in 1842, literally just down the road, okay? None of us were around for that. So 1842. 5 years after that, in 1847, FBC Flushing. So First Baptist Church in Flushing started in 1847. So when you think about it, the collective history of our church goes back almost 200 years. You think about that. When we're nearing the 200-year mark of just the history of our church. One of the things that I think is really enjoyable to do about this is it helps us understand the bigger picture that we are part of. And what I mean by bigger picture is not the bigger picture labeled the river with 4 pieces of paper neatly taped together. I mean the bigger picture of God's story, the bigger picture of what the Lord has done in our region, in our country, over almost 200 years of the gospel advancing. So we're going to kind of leave those 2 dates up there, and we're going to jump forward about 100 years. So we're going to jump forward to the year 1955. So 1955, we are smack dab in the middle of a really huge social change. World War II has come to an end. We're dealing with somewhat of Korea, but interstate highway systems are going in. The country is really booming. There's somewhat of a moral shift in the country. I mean, there's a lot of different stuff that's happening in the 50s. General Motors is booming in the 50s, so there's a lot of different stuff that's happening. So in Waterford in 1955, a man by the name of Al Kasten, so Al Kasten, Kasten, and his wife Evie Kasten decide to start a church in Waterford. So in 1955, they start a church in Waterford, and they meet on Williams Lake Road in the Community Activities Incorporated. I always got it confused in my head because it was the CAI, not the CIA building. So they met in the CAI building, and they started a church. The first person to be saved and baptized was a guy named Bob Parrish. And so Bob and Darlene Parrish are still part of the church to this day. And I got to see Bob a few weeks ago. He's an older man. His health is declining. But Bob and Darlene ended up serving at the church, I think, for 30 plus years as the secretary and organist and all kinds of different things. So Bob was the first to be saved and baptized in 1955 at what was Faith Baptist Church of Waterford. So I want to give you a little history of where that came from. In 1940, I think it was 42. Let me make sure I'm getting my dates right here. In 1942, a guy by the name, some of you who have been around this area might know this name, a guy by the name of Tom Malone started Emmanuel Baptist Church in Pontiac. So Tom Malone started Emmanuel Baptist Church in Pontiac. What a lot of people don't know about that is he split a church to do so. He left what is now Marymount Community Church. And Marymount Community Church is on Walton Boulevard just into Pontiac. And so it's still a church that exists today. Sadly, Emmanuel does not exist anymore. But Emmanuel was part of a group of churches. I don't know any other churches that were part of that at this point in our history. I know there were others from what we understand. But Emmanuel was part of planting Faith Baptist Church of Waterford. So we're going to kind of center around this line here. And kind of as I was trying to timeline, I thought, okay, where do we start? We can start in 1842, we can start in 1847, we can start in 1955. So I chose to start in 1955 essentially, and then kind of go from there because that's what our corporation actually is. So we are the River Church, but it is a DBA of Faith Baptist Church of Waterford. So that's been our long 70 was it 60, almost 70, 60 year, 70 year corporate history. Okay, so Al Caston starts the church. A few years later, they build a building around the corner. They were so awesome and built it right in the middle of a swamp. And so we have had perpetual problems with that building forever. But they decided to do that at that time in the 50s. The way they would fill swamps to be built, they would put telephone poles in them, from what I'm told. And so they filled this swamp as much as they could, which was just across the street from a lake. So, hey, that's a wetland. And so we built a building there. And so in the middle of the 50s, a building was built, Faith Baptist Church of Waterford. A few years later, a Sunday school wing was built in the late 60s and early 70s, I believe. So 60s, 70s. A guy by the name of Joe Pat Massey, who was a pastor from Texas, came. So a little bit of the story here. So Al Caston starts the church, and just a few years after starting the church, he's killed. He was driving down M59 in a car, and a piece of a leaf spring off a truck blew off in front of him, shot through the windshield like a bullet, hit him right in the head and killed him. And widowed his wife, Evie, who I got to meet many years ago. She's passed away now. So the church, I remember asking Bob one day, what were the most difficult times of the church? He said, when Al died. It was like, this is the founder of the church. So his son Bobby took over. And Bobby at the time was a single guy. Bobby was only pastor at the church for about 2 years. And then Joe Pat Massey came in and was the pastor there. Started the Sunday school wing. He left. A guy named Chester Likens came in. Chester Likens actually baptized me when I was a kid. He's in heaven now as well. But Chester Likens finished up the Sunday school wing, was a very, very, very frugal Southern Kentucky gentleman. Listen to some of his sermons and things are quite interesting. So that takes us all the way into the late 80s. Now we're going to step back a little bit with some of the story. And again, this is where it gets kind of hard to navigate a little bit, okay? So we'll kind of go with the story. So in 1989, my dad, so I'll give you 2 dates here. In 1981, the year I was born, my dad became the youth pastor, children's pastor, basically like associate pastor of everything that needed to be done at Faith Baptist Church of Waterford. And my family moved to Texas from 87, 88, and then we moved back in the late summer of 1989, and my dad became the senior pastor in Waterford. So at that point, it was a decent-sized building, probably in the few tens of thousands of square feet, but the church had really gone through a lot of difficulty. So in the early 80s, it was running probably about 300, maybe highs of 400. We've seen some of those metrics and numbers and things. They did a great job. Darlene did a great job, I'm assuming, of charting it out. And saying, so the church was really doing well. By the end of the 80s, it was under 100, and it was not doing well. And so Pastor Likens left. My dad was voted in by one vote. So the vote was 51-50. And I know that because I asked the man who counted the votes in the basement. His name was Ken Sheffer. And Ken Sheffer told me, he's like, yeah, I counted the votes. And the guy counting them with me said, well, we got to go back upstairs and tell him it's 50-50. And Ken Sheffer looked at me at his dining room table and said, I didn't vote yet, and I vote for Jim. And so by one vote, 51-50, we moved from Texas up to Michigan. So the church, who had already gone through a lot of struggles with the exit of Pastor Likens, now was basically split right down the middle. And so my family came. It was very small. I remember coming to the church. I think I was just a few weeks into third grade, so old enough to remember stuff. And I remember it being this big, gigantic, awesome, empty building with no people. And so that was in 1998, or that was in 1989. God started to do some crazy things. I'm trying to put these in here, so this may not be right, so I apologize. Fast forward to the year 1998, and the new building, the current building that's there, was built. So the current building was built, opened Mother's Day, May 10th of 1998. The church was blessed and significantly grew from there, right? So the church was pretty large. So you fast forward to the year 2003, and our journey as a church into what we now know as multi-site or campus ministry or locations, it's got lots of different titles. That's really the year where things really started to happen there. Things really started to change. So in 2003, a guy named Fred Wagner and a guy named Brian Fox, who some of you will know Brian Fox. Fred and Pam no longer live in the area, but some of you would know Fred and Pam. Went and met with my dad in late 2002 and said, hey, what do you think about trying to help us find a pastor? So this history of the church had gone on for quite a bit of time. A lot transpired in there. It's hard. Again, I don't want to miss what people did, okay? During this period of time, this 20 acres that sits on was purchased. It sat here. There was the standard sign out by the road, future home of Atlas Community Baptist Church, all of those types of things. So 10 acres paid for, and there was the hope that a building would be built here one day. If you drive around the corner, there's an older building we used to own. Thank the Lord Jesus, we don't own it anymore. Someone else can deal with all of those foundation issues. So that building around the corner was where we had met, where Atlas Community Baptist Church was meeting. The church had really gone through some difficulties. A pastor had left, a good pastor connected to folks, but the church was really struggling to find a pastor. At the time, Atlas Community Baptist Church was an American Baptist church, and they felt they were trying to get help from the denomination, and I don't know all the nuances or ins and outs of that. But so Fred Wagner, Brian Fox sat down. Again, I think it was Fred Wagner at first, and then Brian was brought in the conversation. Hey, we got this little church up in Atlas. You got anybody that could come fill the pulpit for us? My dad pitched them on the idea of him pastoring two churches at the same time. So in February of 2003, my dad became pastor of Faith Baptist Church of Waterford, which happened in 1989, and now Atlas Community Baptist Church. So I was on staff. I actually started on staff full-time that year in 2003, so I was the kids' intern prior to that, and maintenance and some other things. And so we were kind of two churches, but kind of one. There was never this super clarity as to who we are, so it was kind of this, we're two boards, two budgets, two staffs, all this different thing, but then we're kind of sister churches and share resource and all these different things. So it was exciting, but there were many question marks as to how does this work? Like, how are we related? Like, it was one of those things where there was no defining the relationship. Like, how does this work together? And so that was in 2003. The church grew very quickly, started meeting in Goodrich Middle School, and then shortly thereafter started a building project and began, moved into here, I think, in 06 or 07. I think it might have been 07, the summer of 07. I think that's, if I'm spitballing, I think that's when it was. So that is kind of the journey of getting us to 2003. Now, let me give you a couple other things, just some sidebar notes here as well. So one of the things we did is that Waterford sent what we titled Pioneer Families. So these families, that's not how you spell families. So some of these families, believe it or not, Tim and Virginia Winters. Tim's passed away, gone to heaven now, but Virginia and Tim were part of that. So they were part of the pioneer families that were part of Waterford. And then in 2003, came up here to help revitalize the work in Atlas, which none of us knew where Atlas was at the time. By the way, it was like, Atlas, where's Atlas? So in 2003, something else happened. So in, I think it was May of 2003, Linden Community Baptist Church called my dad to be the pastor as well. So simultaneously, we had 3 churches. So Linden Community Baptist Church out in Fenton. It's not in Linden. It's one of the worst names ever of any church in history, by the way. So Linden Community Baptist Church, no relation to Atlas Community Baptist Church. They just like the Community Baptist name, I guess. So they were there. So we, as a church, we sent, I guess we could use that arrow, we sent more pioneer families to help revitalize the work in Fenton. And so that church today is called the Rock Church. They are not, we would call them our sister church for sure. Like, I'm very good friends with the pastor. A lot of our guys are friends with folks on their staff, really good people, faithful to the gospel. If you know anybody that lives out there looking for a church, don't have them drive here. Have them go there. Okay, it's a fantastic church. So here we are with 3 churches, different names, different boards, different budgets, all of these different things, and trying to figure out the dynamics of all of that. So we'll jump forward a little bit to 2006. So 2006 was a busy year. A few things happened. In 2006, let's go back here. So in 1969, so I'm going to try to draw some things here together for you, some of the story together. A camp was started in Rose City, Michigan, called Christian Youth Enterprises. Who wants to go to Christian Youth Enterprises? So I don't know where that ever came from. That was the business name, but they ended up being New Life Camp. So New Life Camp started in 1969. In the late to mid-'70s, a family by the name of the Mottsingers went up there and directed the camp until the early 2000s. Their son Ken took over the camp as well. And then in 2006, the camp was very much struggling. And I don't want to insult the camp or insult anybody's efforts to the camp. I remember driving in there in the fall of 2005. I did not drive in there in the fall of 1969. But in the fall of 2005 or the winter of 2005, and said, this is the worst camp I've ever seen in my life. I never want to go here. The next summer, we were all at that camp. So there was no getting around that. So that happened. So 1969. So in 2006, we essentially took over management leadership of New Life Camp. So that happened in 2006. So 2006 was our first year. So keep in mind, now there's a camp. Now there is this church, Waterford, and then Goodrich, or what we know as Goodrich, all trying to work together. And it was a very strange thing. So not to make things easy, we decided to plant another church called the River. So in 2006, the River was planted at Holly High School. So again, this little dash here represents more pioneer families. This time, the amount of pioneer families was somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 plus people. So the idea was, so back in here, back in this range, there was 13 acres around the corner from the current Waterford facility that we purchased for $1.675 million. And so we had 13 acres there, designed a building. We're going to build a building there. And then all this stuff started to happen. And then the building was never built. So we actually, so on that corner of that property was a sign that said, future home of the River, a ministry of Faith Baptist Church of Waterford. It was basically, I don't want to be insulting. It was basically a passive-aggressive way of renaming the church, okay? It was basically just kind of this backwards way of going, no, we're not changing the name of the church, and it's the River, right? So that's kind of how things transpired there. So there was some issues there, and then with quasi-multi-site, in 2006, launched the River at Holly High School. So the River met there in Holly High School for several years, for 4 years actually. So back to kind of the story of here. So 2003, so new building. So the building we're currently in here was built in 2007. Jen and I came to be what was called the campus pastor. So there was a campus pastor here, campus pastor here, campus pastor here, campus pastor here, but not really part of the same church. So it was this weird, again, who are you? How are we related? What do we do here? It was a very strange thing. So we actually came January 1st, 2008. So 2008, we came here, and I knew everything about pastoring at the time. I have since forgotten and realized I know nothing about pastoring. So 2008, we came here. About 5 years after that, so gets us to 2013. This is where true multi-site begins. So keep in mind, we still have this quasi-relationship over here. So in 2013, on Easter of 2013, Goodrich starts 2 locations. Goodrich starts Grand Blanc, and we start a Flint location. So we had 3 locations that were called The Point. So by the time we moved into this new building, the church here in Goodrich was called The Point. Okay? So you had The Point, you had this evolve into what's known as The Rock, you had this known as the river, and then you still had this stream here known as Faith Baptist Church of Waterford. So that gets us up to 2013. Okay? So 2013, we launched multi-site. Then about 2 years after that, in 2015, so May of 2015, actually I drew this wrong, sorry. In May of 2015, we will call this the mega merger, okay? Just for fun, okay? It's not really what it's called. I'm just being an idiot. So 2014-ish, my dad calls me. I was on Hill Road driving. He says, hey, I'm getting ready to hire a director of operations. Would you ever consider merging the churches together? And I said, yeah, I'd have a conversation about that. So maybe the end of 13 into 14, we had a conversation. I have all the notes written in this. I don't want to, again, this is going to be summary. I have it written in what I call a Unabomber notebook. It looks like this, people, okay? All right. You realize how spastic my brain is. So I said, yeah, I would really consider doing that. So we had a long conversation about it. And, oh, by the way, my wife corrected me, Fred and Pam Arnold, not Fred and Pam Wagner. 2 different people, sorry. Fred and Pam Arnold. Sorry to insult them. Thank you, Tom, for being gracious. So my wife is helping me out. So anyways, so I had a conversation, and we talked about it, and I decided no. Just decided I didn't think that was the right thing to do. A few months later, maybe a year later, end of 14, maybe into 15, my brother and I were sitting at lunch at Culver's in Grand Blanc. And I don't know why I remember all these places based on food, sorry. I'm a very visual person. But so he said, hey, would you ever revisit the merger? Absolutely. And so I think from that time of the first conversation to the last conversation, God had really changed some things in my heart. And I felt like it was what the Lord wanted us to do. And so we went through a series of different conversations. You can call them negotiations, because it was trying to figure out, how is this going to work? My thing was, I did not want to go back to this. I did not want to go back to this. We're related, we're not related. I don't know what this is. There needed to be a cohesive vision, leadership, all of those different things, even name. So in 2015, all of these locations, so Flint, Grand Blanc, and Goodrich merged into the river. And so of May of that year, we became the river. Here's the dilemma, okay, everybody? This stream right here represents more than people. These 2 entities, Waterford and the river, were one entity financially, operating as two separate churches, essentially, 2 different events, 2 different boards, different staffs, all of these different things, websites, practical things. But debt load, finances, all of those different things, 1. So it was this weird kind of Siamese twin. Can we, Ben Carson, cut these 2 Siamese twins in half and both survive and everybody be fine? It was a very difficult time. So at the time in 2015, Ernesto Alanis was the pastor, the campus pastor there at Waterford. We had many conversations about what this would look like. And Nessa, who's a dear friend of mine, left. The summer of 2015, left Waterford. And at that point, it was a foregone conclusion that Waterford would then be part of the merger. And so it took about a year. For that to happen. So we'll just put it here. So in 2016, Waterford became part of the river. All of these things became part of the river. So one corporate entity, one name, one vision, all of these different things. Officially, the church had to vote at that time, and one of the very few people to vote in Waterford for the name change. Now, there were very few people that voted. Nobody voted against it, to my recollection. One of the few people that showed up to vote was Bob and Darlene Parrish. All right? People saved in 1955. And they came and they voted to change the name of the church no longer from Faith Baptist Church of Waterford to the river. So it was kind of a neat moment. I remember Bob coming in and doing that. So 15, 16 really begins the multi-site as we know it. The vision of Reach, Gather, Grow, the structure that we have from an organizational standpoint, all of those different things really begin to coalesce in 2016. So a few things happen in the next couple years, okay? So we'll rewind back here to 1957. So in 1957, a church begins in Flint called Bethany Missionary Baptist Church, okay? So Bethany Missionary Baptist Church, and they start there in 2007. So I'm going to get these dates right because I actually really enjoy this part. So in 2007, they move from Flint to a facility on Hemphill Road. I think it's Hemphill Road. I hope I'm right about where that's at. Does anybody know, is that on Hemphill Road? What's that? No, I'm talking about Burton. So I should know where that's at. I know how to get there in my head. So in 2007, they moved to where they are. They purchased that building from Farnham Wood Presbyterian Church. So never heard of it. But Farnham Wood Presbyterian Church, they purchased that building in 2007. They moved from Flint to Burton. So they're there in 2018. Their church was going through some difficulties. I don't know if you've seen that theme now. The church was going through difficulties. The camp was going through going through difficulties. So in 2018, Burton merges in. Now, one quick note, we'll add this. So in 2015, merger, 2016, the river. In early 2016, so I'll just put a note in here. In early 2016, we closed Flint. So you're going to laugh at me at this story. I was at the Flint Farmers Market with Ernesto for lunch, and we were by the cinnamon rolls. And sorry, it's just the visual in my head. We're walking down the aisle and cinnamon rolls. So we were walking by the cinnamon rolls, and God just said, hey, you need to close the Flint location. You need to tell all these people to go be with Nesto. And so that's what I did. Came back, told our elders, hey, I think this is what God wants us to do. They're like, okay. And so I told Nesto that, told the church that. We just had really struggled for years to find a leader, like a person, a guy to take that on. And I just felt like this is what the Lord wanted us to do. So they agreed to that. We closed Flint in early 2016. Sadly, a lot of those folks did not go with Ernesto. And it was just a handful of folks, probably maybe 50 people, give or take a few. So that is in 2018. So at that point, we are Grand Blanc, Holly, Goodrich, Waterford, and now Burton. So we're 5 locations at that point. That is in 2018. So that's in late 2018. The current guy there, Ryan Story, we came to him in late 2018. We said, we think you need to go and be the location guy at Burton. And so he was the student guy at Holly and moved out of that role and has done a great job at Burton. And it's exciting to see what God has been doing there. Ryan is just a terrific guy. He's a huge nerd, but he loves the Lord, and he is just a wonderful person, a very, very smart. So that leads us to 2019. And for the history of our church, 2019 was probably, in my opinion, and again, I wasn't alive when Al Caston was here, 2019 was probably the most difficult year. And so early 2019, discovered that my dad had disqualified himself from ministry, and then we had to remove him as the senior pastor. And so that was in late March, early April of 2019. And so at that point, it was like, okay, what's this story going to look like? Right? What does this look like going forward? So for me, this event right here was, I don't want to sound prophetic, and I don't want to say I was planning for this, but 2015 was me. I didn't care what the church was going to be named. That didn't matter to me. What mattered to me was this arrow. What mattered to me was, what does the future look like when I'm gone, when you're gone, when there's not a Combs in sight? What's that look like? And we need to make sure that we're building, understand that we're not building the church, but we need to structure in a sense that there is long-term sustainability, that we're not building around one person. So what I learned back in these days was a few things. Don't build around a single personality. And number 2, define relationships. Define what the vision is for what you're trying to do, so that people that are leading know what they're supposed to be doing, and people that are part of the church know, hey, this is where we're collectively going as a family and as a group. So that hits in 2019, and we just kind of all brace ourselves like, what the heck is going to happen? Well, there were lots of other things that were going to happen, and that's been part of, honestly, I was on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and a guy asked me, how have you seen God's faithfulness in the last couple of years? And it was like, yeah, that's really hard to condense down to a short answer, because it's been an epic ride. So let's rewind the clock a little bit more. I got to do this so the streams don't cross. I'm going to be in trouble here, I can already tell. All right, so we got to go back to 1968. 1968. You're going to want to keep these names clear in your head, because this will matter on this one. Calvary Baptist Church starts in Davison. So Calvary Baptist Church starts in Davison. A really excited, visionary pastor goes and he buys some land. If you go up on Irish Road and you see the Davison location now, there is a picture in the front lobby. I'd encourage you to see it whenever you get a chance. It's a picture of a house. And you walk in and you go, why is there a picture of a house in the front lobby? This seems really weird. That's the building now. So the building, Davison, started as a house and then was added onto. From an architectural standpoint, it's a complete disaster, okay? But man, you're excited about people's vision, you're excited about people's investment and sacrifice and work and all of those different things. So that starts in 1968. So let's go back to the year. So this is going to get real messy real quick here, kids. Just wanted to throw that out there. So 2006 in Calvary Bible Church, not to be confused with Calvary Baptist Church, but Calvary Bible Church in Lapeer splits. So 2006, it splits, and a church called Life Fellowship Chapel begins out of that. They start meeting in a barn, in a pole barn. The church, Calvary Bible, split right down the middle. So the pastor was there, split it right down the middle. I think it was like 300 people went with him, 300 people stayed. It was really devastating. And so Calvary Bible in Lapeer splits. The pastor, these leaders start Life Fellowship Chapel. They meet in a barn. Winter comes, and you're in a barn. There are some extraordinary pictures of these people meeting, dressed for winter, in a barn, gathering as the church. It's really fascinating. So they go and they lease out the old Ponderosa restaurant, all right, in Lapeer. So they lease it out, and they build it out, and they build it out where the church can meet there. And so that's where they're doing. Well, this guy, I think his name is Larry Crabtree. Nope, it's not Larry Crabtree. Oh, man. The lady who's in charge of the archives was on vacation today, so I couldn't call her to ask her what his name was. I remember it before. So this guy has a vision for multi-site. What's crazy is very similar to what we're doing now. So it kind of freaked me out a little bit when I started reading the articles about it. So articles in the Flint Journal, all kinds of different stuff. So Life Fellowship Chapel starts there in Lapeer. And then in 2007, I know we're getting a little off here, so sorry. In 2007, Calvary merges with them. So now they have two sites. They have a site in Lapeer, and they have a site in Davison. So two sites. The current pastor, not the current pastor, but the pastor that was there in Davison stays on, is going to be like a care pastor, connections pastor, all these different things. And it didn't go well. So they couldn't sustain the two locations, so they ended up shutting down the Lapeer location. It's now the Secretary of State. And then they all moved to the Davison location, the current Davison location there on Irish Road. So that was in 2007. Pastor ends up leaving, and a guy named Ty Wozniak comes in, pastors there for several years. Church was doing okay, good people, loved the Lord, faithful to the gospel, not heretical, none of those different things, but really struggling to be effective with kids and students and younger families. And so crazy. In the summer of 2019, they merge with us. So we then have 6 locations. So 6 locations. So now we add a Davison location. The story gets crazy. I'm going to keep going here. And I need a taller board. I messed up. I left too much space in the bottom. Ooh. I'm going to cross the streams, everybody. You guys okay with that? Oh, I'm really upset at myself. Oh, no, I don't have to. We'll be good. Okay. So we'll go back to 1962. 1962, a church called House of Prayer begins in Flint. They begin in Flint in 1962. About 10 or so years later, in 1976, they moved to the Grand Blanc Township Hall. And they are meeting there until they build a building. I think it was in 1982. They break ground on the current building there on Grand Blanc Road. It was originally called the House of Prayer. And so they moved there in 1982. It is the most sacred of all of our buildings. If you do a Google image search of that building, it is shaped like a cross. So it's quite awesome. But small building, but they sacrificed. They built that building in the early 80s and met there. That church existed until 2010. So around that same time, We're getting crazy here, sorry. Around that same time, in 2010, a little bit prior to that, First Baptist Church of Fenton splits. And the pastor leaves there and takes some people, starts a new church in Grand Blanc, and they purchase the building from House of Prayer in 2010. So their church was Grace Bible. Okay. So Grace Bible starts there in Grand Blanc in 2010. So it's a fun fact of the day, in 2013, approached these guys about merging. Went to them, their pastor was, I think, in his early 60s at the time, and I said, hey, I'm 30-something years old, would love to have someone like you on our team. This would be great. And so we have a conversation with them. 2013, it doesn't happen. A little bit of time goes by, we have another conversation with them. It doesn't happen. 6 years later, Grace Bible goes through some difficulties, and in the late, I think it was in fall, October of 2019, votes to merge in with the River. We already had a Grand Blanc location. I want you to see God's timing on all this. Now Grand Blanc has a building, no longer has to meet in the Trillium movie theater, which they had been meeting in for 6 years. 6 years. The seats were fantastic, right? Oh, listen, there were people at times that thought it was great to bring in popcorn, but 6 years in the movie theater, very difficult because the timing had to be out of the theater by 11, out, gone, done. So you had to have a 9:30 gathering. Wasn't super conducive to young families. It's also not super conducive to do a nursery in the front end of a movie theater that's sticky and kind of weird, and you're like, yeah, I don't like this. So it was difficult. It was really challenging. So 2016, hired Chuck Lindsay. Chuck Lindsay came and was the location pastor there. So then, and still is, in 2019, late 2019, merged in with Grace Bible. So the next year, 2020, nothing happened. It was a very quiet year. Everybody was super peaceful. No biggie whatsoever. We just kept plugging along. The world was the same. It was easy, right? 2020 was a huge hit. And what's really fascinating to watch God's hand, Grand Blanc could not have continued to meet at all because they were in the movie theater. And so to think about God's provision in 2019 and late 2019, it was only 4 months later that the world shut down, and we had a place from Grand Blanc to be able to broadcast, and then a place later on in May to open up and be able to have in-person gatherings. So just watching the whole timing of God, knowing it started all the way back here with Christians in 1962 who had a passion to reach people, moved to the township hall, moved in and sacrificed and built a cross-shaped building in 1982. And that's part of the story here all the way in 2019. Okay? I don't know how I'm going to fit everything else. By the way, this is why if we get more locations, this whiteboard will double. So, and I'll have to re-record the video. So let's go to a couple different things. Okay, this one is particularly fascinating to me. So, in 1937, some people in the little town of Gingiville. Okay? In the town of Gingiville, which is a little bit north on Baldwin Road from Great Lakes Crossing, they decide that they're going to start a Sunday school. They decide they're going to start a Sunday school. Now, one of the things that I love is I love 20th century church history. It's really fascinating to me. and I love the stories and the different things. I love reading the books. So in 1937, a group of people decide, some of them being the Gingell family, decide to start a Sunday school for kids. And Sunday school's evolved over the years. Sunday school's come and gone. Listen, Sunday school is a new thing. It's okay. Things come, things go. Teaching the Bible is what matters, right? That's what matters. So what we call it doesn't really matter. Actually, believe it or not, it wasn't until I think it was either the 30s, 40s. It wasn't the 50s. It was the 30s or 40s when dividing Sunday school up by ages was even an invention. And it's credited to a guy named J. Frank Norris at a church, at First Baptist Church of Fort Worth. Okay, that's a fun fact that you'll want to keep for trivia, because that one will come up for sure. Okay, anyways, so 1937, some Gingells get together and they start a Sunday school in Gingellville, and they build a building in 1942. Well, what's happening in 1942? World War II. So they build a building that, from what I understand, was basically just a basement. So it's basically just a basement building, so they can have Sunday school. And they are sponsored by, okay, I'm going to put some stuff in here for you. New Life Camp was helped a church in Pontiac called First Baptist Church of Pontiac. Helped, with some people from that church, helped to start New Life Camp. Okay, so in the 1937, First Baptist Church of Pontiac helps to sponsor the Gingell family and some others to start a Sunday school. There's a guy at our Waterford location. His name is Roger Sykes. Roger Sykes just turned 90 back, I think it was in September, October. Roger Sykes' mother-in-law started the Gingellville Sunday School. So the Gingellville Sunday School starts. They get the original building in 1950. They add on to the building. That says 50, I promise. So they add the education building. Okay. So they got a little church there in Gingellville. And then it wasn't until, I'm going to just, sorry for my madness, by the way. Okay. So a few years after that, 1961, they are free from FBC Pontiac oversight. Pontiac at the time was pastored by a guy named Henry Savage. Okay, so super influential in the Oakland County area for churches. So we'll keep going forward here. So, gosh, what does that even say? 74. There we go. 72. The current building there is built. Current building. In 1988, the church name changes to Gingellville Community Church, I believe from Gingellville Baptist Church, and they go on. So 2020 hits, real difficult year. Again, not meeting in person, masks and all kinds of different things, racial unrest, political upheaval. 2020 was a gem of a year, right? Just absolutely, again, all kinds of different things that were happening. So really had a significant impact on Gingellville. So the pastor there has been there for 17 years. He's been the pastor there since 2014. He was the student pastor there before, and then I say moved up, not like it's moving up, but just transitioned into being the senior pastor. So in the summer of 2021, Gingellville Community Church votes to merge with the river. So that happened in June of 2021. What's interesting about that particular vote is that it had to be 90%. It had to be 90% or higher. typically churches are 80% is really like high, like an 80% vote when you have churches that vote, or 2/3 majority. I mean, there's or a simple majority. 90% was like, we are not holding our breath. We don't think this is going to happen, and it did. And so the location pastor there now, who was the pastor that led that merger, his name was Josh Yates. He and his wife Jeannie are both on our staff. Credible people, and they had settled with the road commission because of the expansion of Baldwin Road. For about $1.5 million, because their building was significantly closer to the road, the way it was built. There's some things that need to be changed so that it was safe to build. So again, complications here and prior. So they had been in negotiations with the road commissions for years. If you drive down there, it's very close to the road. And so when we agreed with that. The Gingell family was still involved at the time. They donated the land that the building was built on in 1942. So we committed to a massive building project. So if you ever drive down Baldwin Road and you see it there's about a $2 million building project going on right now. And massive to do, exciting for them. So at that point, things are pretty crazy, and we're like, okay, let's kind of get acclimated with that. Well, the church that I had gone and met with the pastor back in the fall of 2020, met with him and his one of the deacons there, the last deacon at the church. The church has gone through some difficulties. Again, there's that theme again. I hope you're keeping count how many times I've said that. But had gone through some really difficult struggles. So in June of that year, the pastor, I think it was either May or June of 2021 this year, the pastor stepped down, resigned and left. And so the deacon called us that day and said, we want to give you everything. And I said, well, that's not really how this works. I said, we need to look at what your bylaws are. We need to make sure this is legal and not just legal, but ethical and honorable. That's a big deal to us. Like, again, there's a lot going on here. Don't forfeit God's blessing by being stingy or greedy or, selfishly ambitious, whatever it might be. So we met with them, and our elders went out. I did not go. And I'll be really honest with you why I didn't go. Because in 2013, I went and pitched Graham Blank on merging with us and did such a terrible job. I've never recovered. Okay, I've never recovered. I was just like, oh my gosh, I never want to do that ever again. So all of our elders except me went, and I was like, hey guys, how'd it go? Oh, it went great. It was wonderful. I'm like, awesome. So they voted in August. So we're going to do this a little bit. Sorry. So they voted in August. So 89, they moved from their original building in town to their new building. If you haven't been up to Flushing, it's incredible. Those folks sacrificed and built an incredible facility. So in 1989, they built their current facility. It went through a lot of difficult times with pastors and things. So there's some older folks there that I've got the chance to meet. I don't get there often, and it's difficult sometimes. But one of the ladies just passed away a couple weeks ago. Her husband rang the bell in the original building. And so the bell that he rang is mounted outside of the Flushing building with a plaque with his name on it. It's really cool. So some neat history there. So I got to meet her before she passed away. But there's some sweet older folks there who have gone through a lot of difficult struggles, a lot of difficult pastoral moral failures and some things that are just really, really difficult. So in August of this year, they voted to merge with us to become our 8th location. And so pretty crazy. So let me throw some fun little sidebars in here, okay? Let me check the time because I got to hurry up. I had no idea how long this was going to take me, okay? So let's see how I want to timeline that. 1997. So from 97 So Waterford had a Christian school called Waterford Christian Academy, and that stayed open until 2008. So think about that. In the middle of there's a camp, there's a school, there's all these different churches. It was a crazy, like, put a tent over that circus type mentality. Okay, in 2000 and where are we at? This is 2010, yeah. So we'll go here. So 2011. Okay, 2011. My dad becomes the pastor at First Baptist Church of Walled Lake. It's now called Market Street Church. Yeah, Market Street Church. And my friend, Chris Doak, is the pastor there. So Chris went there in 2011. So he went and became the pastor there in 2011. I called him when I was putting this timeline together. Nope, he did not go there in 2011. He went there in 2012. So Doak went there was at Waterford as the campus pastor there, and left to go to Walled Lake in 2012. Some people were sent with him, similar, but not in the same ways, like pioneer families, but kind of. And so he is still the pastor there. So 10 years. It's great for Doak. I'm actually having lunch with him tomorrow. So excited about that. Let's see. I want to add just a couple other things. Nothing crazy. Oh, a couple fun facts, okay? First Baptist Church of Pontiac moved to White Lake, Michigan, and still called themselves First Baptist Church of Pontiac. No joke. It was the weirdest thing growing up, because I grew up in Waterford, and you drive down M59 and be like, First Baptist Church of Pontiac. Like, Pontiac's the other way on M59. Like, they were in White Lake. But there was such a rich history of Pontiac, of the church and all that had done. So I don't know what specific year, but First Baptist Church of Pontiac that moved to White Lake is now the White Lake location of Woodside Bible Church. So kind of an intersection there. And so, yeah, that's the history of the church. I mean, there's been other things. There's been pastors who have left and, taken people with them and started churches, and there's no reason to denigrate them, because here's what I realized as I was putting this together. It's wrong to split a church, but Jesus redeemed stuff. And so Paul even says, and I'll share this not as a knock against anybody at all, but just as a thought. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, in that I rejoice. So I'm not saying people who have split the church don't preach the real gospel or don't believe it. What I'm saying is, sometimes we do dumb things. Sometimes dumb things happen. Sometimes people make mistakes and mess up. At the end of the day, what are we most happy about? We're most happy about when Christ is proclaimed. If the gospel is proclaimed, okay, that's what matters. That's what matters most, okay? So that is I know that doesn't sound brief, but that's real brief, all right? That is a real brief. I did my best. I didn't cross the streams, which is crazy. So I'm happy about that. Does anybody have any questions? Let me get... No, you're okay. Can I give you the microphone? I don't know if anybody's watching online or I put them to sleep. That may have happened, so I don't know. Here you go.
All right. Now, as you were going through this, like you mentioned, some, like, you went to churches and pitched. Other times, churches came to the river. How does that work out? I mean, how do you decide what church you want to go pitch to as you've gone through this?
It really varies. I would love to have I'd love to have a better answer than what I'm going to give you. for me, what I believe is that every community we're in, including Goodrich, needs more churches. Needs more churches. So if you start looking at the numbers of people, so rough numbers, in Atlas Township, okay, there are 7,000 people. On a given Sunday here, between in-person and online, people watching live online, is about 1,100, 1,200. We're not even close. So I think there's this mentality, and I've had it before. That's part of my repentance. I've had it that it's like, no one else needs to come to this community. We're here. Well, we're not getting it done. Like we need other churches. So I'm thankful that Bridgewood came and is over on Green Road. They're preaching the gospel. Their pastor's a good dude. I'm thankful for the little I say little. I'm thankful for it's little in building wise, but the Nazarene church down the road, they're preaching the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus for the saving of souls. I'm thankful for First Baptist of Goodrich. They're more conservative. They're going to have choirs and hymns and wear suits and ties. They're preaching the gospel. They're preaching the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus as the only way to be saved. Great. Great. Again, I don't want to speak to anybody. I don't know any specifics. Like I don't know enough about the Methodist Church. I don't know about other churches. I know there's a little church down on 15, Pine Grove. Yeah, they'll preach the gospel there. I found out who the pastor was the other day. I went to school with his kid. Like, his kid. He's 40 years old like me, so I went to school with his son. His little boy I went to school with. He's preaching the gospel. So it's like, it's great. So there's 7,000 people. You look at like Grand Blanc. Last time I knew it, the number was 32,000. And I'll put a plus there because we know it's growing. Is it 40? The 40. Thank you. It's 40,000 people. Our Grand Blanc location runs 300, 400, including online on a high weekend. So what is 400? 400 is 1%. That's good math, by the way, for me, everybody. I just want you guys to be impressed by that. 1%. So we every place we are, like right prior to this, right prior to going multi-site, our youth pastor here left. John Scally went and became the pastor at Emmanuel Baptist Church up in Flint. Good dude, loves Jesus. A little different than me. I'm different than him. But he loves the Lord. He faithfully preaches the gospel. They merged with a church just a few months ago in Grand Blanc. They merged with Great Lakes Baptist Temple, a church that was, really struggling. David Chittenden was the pastor, and nice man, loved the Lord. But they merged with them. I'm thankful for that. Here's why. We have that percentage. So then you start going crazy. Let's just round up. There's 10 million people in Michigan. On a weekend, let's say a high weekend. We had a high weekend a few weeks ago. We had 5,000. We aren't 1%. Not even close. So our church, sure, it's a bigger church. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of exciting things that happen. We're not touching near that. Not even close. And part of what we have to understand is no one is. Nobody is. That's why the body of Christ is so important. So for us as we go, I think it looks at what's going on at the church. What's happening at the church. Pat Rowland, Caleb Jones is our director, locations development director is his title. So he works with Pat when it comes to going and talking to churches about potentially, we've called it merger, we've called it unification, we've called it adoption. I don't care. Do you want to be on the team? What term do you want to give this? Adoption is the more common term now because it's more familial and people like that. So we go and have conversations with them, talk to them about what it looks like. Part of what Scott has helped, and I'm not trying to insult anybody, we're not this anymore. It's not, it's very clear, hey, here's who we are. We're the River Church. Here's how we do multi-site. Here's, we're wrapping up at the end in a couple weeks, nailing down our core values. I mean, they exist, but we're really articulating them for the first time. Here's our vision of reach, gather, grow. I've started to say to our people, one person and one community at a time. That's kind of become kind of verbiage for me. It's not like everybody speaks that lingo yet, but it's like, this is about person to person, and then it's about one community at a time. Because I don't believe, the irony of this, I don't believe in the megachurch. I do not believe in the attractional drive from far away, come to this megachurch. I don't believe in that. I believe in community churches because there are nuances, there are unique dynamics to every community. Again, if you're a pastor in Oxford, Michigan, you're going to deal with trauma and hurt, and you're going to have to be very sensitive to a lot of that for 20 years. Like that's, and in 20 years, it won't have gone away. It just will have faded a little bit. But for some of those people, it never will. You're just you're always going to have to navigate that in a community like that. There are unique dynamics here to Goodrich. Goodrich, honestly, of all our locations, we don't know so much about Lake Warren and Flushing yet because they're so new. Out of the other 6 locations, Goodrich is the most different. It's the most different. Things that are slam dunk, outreach, bring in gobs of people. I love you guys. You don't care. It's just really humorous. It's like, yeah, I don't want to go do that. Everybody else, like mobs of people. So again, you could be annoyed about it, but I'm not, because I go, it's just unique. So there are unique dynamics to that. So I think you're looking at what's going on in the community. What's the history of the church? Like some of the histories of these churches are kind of sketchy. Like it's kind of sad. Like don't split a church. You can't do that. Like don't do that. God doesn't honor that. I've had that conversation with lots of pastors who are on their way to doing it. I'm like, please don't do this. Like, please don't do this. Like God's just not honored in that. It's not like you'll never see fruit of any kind, but the foundation is off. It's not level. It's not square. It's not plumb. It's something's just going to be a bit off forever. So I think here in the history of the churches, I think looking at from a resource standpoint, we are about $4 million a year brought in offerings, probably monies that go through the accounts about $5 million. So you're talking camps and different rentals or whatever. So it may be about $5 million, but from a giving standpoint, we're about $4 million a year. Well, right now we're 8 locations. We run pretty lean for $4 million. So it's like, okay, how much more can we divide up $4 million? If someone dropped $4 million in your lap today, you'd be like, sweet, there's $4 million, and I quit my job. No, I'm just saying, $4 million it'd be a great thing. But when you got $4 million and then you have about 50 or 60 employees, we have a little under $6 million in debt for the Waterford location, for the Holly location, and for here. The rest of other facilities are debt-free, but they're part of the collateral on that loan. So again, how I'm looking at going, okay, 2021, if I draw this arrow over there, and I draw the arrow to, I've never done this before, so this might freak me out. If I draw the arrow to 2046, okay, I will be 65. So let's say, can I run till I'm 65? So even and shorten it up, let's go 2041. I'm 60 years old. By then, there has to be clear. Again, this is why we build the way we do. This is why there are location guys in place. I'm not the guy preaching there. I'm not the face of those locations. I don't want to do that. I want to be here, and I want to be here with you guys. But I also have the gift and the ability from the Lord to lead on a bigger scale, the bigger, I say conglomerate. That sounds terrible to say, but the bigger picture. And so I walk this kind of duality of that. How long can I do that? So let's say I can do it till I'm 60. Well, what's it look like in 60? Because if you go back to 2016, we were 4 locations, basically. So you got 5 locations, 6 locations, 7 locations, 8. I don't know if I counted wrong here. Anyway, no, that's not one. So 8 locations. Like, what is it in 5 more years? What's it in 2026? Is it 16 locations? Is it 20 locations? Is it 30 locations? I don't know. So it's growing as a leader. It's realizing that our state needs more churches, but then it's also not going, they have to be in Michigan. What if they're somewhere else? What if they're in a different country? What does that look like? So these are all things that I've sat in quiet and made more maps like that and just thought, I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know. And so I think with COVID, that's taught us some things about the digital world. And again, this is part of the fine line that we have to walk. I have to care about every single one of you in here. I'm going to talk about this a little bit, I think, on Sunday from 1 Thessalonians. Face-to-face is wonderful, right? Face-to-face is the optimal idea. But that camera represents potentially, legitimately, potentially to watch just tonight, hundreds of people. On Sundays, it represents the possibility of thousands of people watching that. You posted that on YouTube, who knows how many people will watch it. So that's where we have to kind of go, you're important, and so are you. And we can't miss one without the other. Well, what does that mean for multi-site? People ask me sometimes, will we simulcast? I have no interest in it. I have zero interest in being on a screen. I don't want to do that. It would probably mean I'd have to lose like 50 pounds. So I don't want to do that for one reason. But I don't want to do that because I believe, again, back to the community model. So what's going on in that community? What's happening there? There are a few grids that I work through personally. What's it take to make a location work? 2 things, a guy and a building. So one of the things that we realized at Grand Blanc is that we hovered around 100. Sometimes it was 120, sometimes it was 150, sometimes it was 98. Sometimes it was 120, sometimes it was 150. High days, Easter, whatever, it was 200, 105, 106, 108, 112. Like, it just hovered there until we got a building. And you realize just, again, a part of our culture is that having a place for people to land, having just a facility to meet in. But it also lingered because we need pastors. So you need you need a guy. You need a guy there shepherding the people. And so that's what we look for. The other thing that I look on the grid for, and this is not a hard and fast rule, but as I look for a high school, is there a high school? Is there people? And that doesn't mean that every location will ever be part of or will have a high school in their town, but makes it a heck of a lot easier when I can drive Keaton in the car and be like, go get him. Like, go. And it's not that we don't have Grand Blanc people that are part of the location here, but I go, that's the bullseye. Go get them. Like, go get those high school kids, go get those middle school kids, and the same to every one of our other locations. Go get them. Like, there's a clear target, there's a clear bullseye. Go get them. And I think the church has to. I think the church has to do that, especially the next generation has to really invest and target that. So, yeah, is there kids? Doesn't mean that we wouldn't plan a location in, again, Florida with a bunch of senior adults. That'd be great. That'd be fantastic. I volunteer. I'm feeling the Lord's calling. No, I'm just kidding. But then you would look and go, okay, what's that going to look like? What's the programming going to look like? What is again, with finances and stuff, you don't have to be in the same state. Technology, you don't have to be in the same state. So part of what I believe in multi-site, even though this stresses me out just turning around and looking at it, I believe in multi-site because it leverages the giftings of many people for the advancement of the gospel, rather than one person trying to be everything. I don't have all the spiritual gifts, and a lot of pastors in churches, small church pastors who only have one staff, they're required to be everything. I I cannot do that. I don't have all the abilities. I don't have all the spiritual gifts. So I don't have to force myself to be a Swiss Army knife. I can actually be very proficient and an expert in what I am good at. And I can focus on those things. And then as a team, I go, oh, you're awesome at that? Great, take that. So that's why I can make a joke about going and pitching that church in 2013, laugh at myself and go, I never want to do that ever again. Pat Rowland is a genius at it. He's great. I told him when he went up to Flushing, he told those folks, if you vote this in, we're probably going to move to Sunday night so that we can bring in good preaching and good music for you. Your church is in real trouble. And they went, oh, okay, and voted in. So it's not a bait and switch. There's no, oh, you didn't read the fine print on the contract. It's like, now here's what it is. We want to be honest, but we do believe in this. And so places like Flushing, it's probably a $5 million facility. And I think they had about 20 people. And then a storm hit there a couple weeks later. It would have been lights out for them. It really would have been. They would have lost their building or had to sell it. And it's so I'm thankful that God's let us partner with those folks. So I'm thankful that I got to find it. It's kind of stupid, and you'll realize sometimes. Sorry, I took too much time. I'll shut up. So I noticed I love church buildings. So I grew up running around church buildings and finding all the good hiding spots, and it's just great. Not because I was necessarily a bad kid, but I just love the buildings. I love the smell of church buildings. Like I walked into this church in Flushing and knew it was Southern Baptist. And this is embarrassing to say, by the smell. I'm like, the guy goes, yeah, it used to be Southern Baptist. I'm like, yeah, it smells like that. He looked at me like I was nuts. Like, maybe that's why it took a year for something to happen. But again, that's why I don't do those things. But I went through the building and, oh gosh, Josh there, I think he's telling me to shut up. 2-minute warning. Okay, I got to be done. Anyway, so I walked through the building, went into the baptistry. The stage was there, and I found the old cornerstone of the building and drug it out. Sweating, nasty, got it out. We put it in the